Springfield. In the winter of 1809, in a small log cabin near Hodgenville, Kentucky, a child was born who would one day reshape the course of a nation. His name, Abraham Lincoln. The cabin was barely large enough for the family that built it. Rough timbers chinked with clay, a single window letting in the gray light of dawn. His father, Thomas Lincoln, worked with steady hands, building furniture and fences from the trees around him. His mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, was gentle and kind, her voice soft against the wilderness wind. The Lincolns lived far from towns or schools. Every meal, every fire, every shelter was carved out of hardship and faith. Life on the Kentucky frontier demanded more than strength. It required endurance, hope, and a belief that tomorrow could always be better than today. Neighbors would later remember that Thomas taught his son to work hard and keep his word. But from his mother, Abraham inherited something quieter, a love for words, for reading, for the wonder of learning itself. As snow melted across the fields that spring, the family began again, moving from one patch of earth to the next, always chasing better ground. In that restless spirit, the young boy's story began, a story of ordinary beginnings in an extraordinary land. Soft fade, low strings, sound of wind, and creaking cabin door. Childhood unfolded between axe strokes and prayer. His mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, was the warmth inside those rough-hewn walls, her hands worn by labor, her eyes alive with quiet purpose. Each night by the hearth, she opened a family Bible and guided her son's finger along the lines. The boy traced every letter as though it held a key to the world beyond the trees. Her lessons were simple but enduring. Work honestly, speak kindly, seek understanding. In her calm voice, he learned that greatness begins in goodness. But the frontier's beauty carried hardship. Autumn 1818 brought a sickness no one understood. As the days grew short, Nancy's voice weakened, her light dimmed. Abraham sat near her bed, the flicker of fire catching in his eyes, too young to grasp that this silence would last forever. When the forest stilled, Thomas built a small coffin from pine. Beneath a hickory tree, they laid her to rest, the wind whispering through bare branches. The world felt colder, emptier, yet her spirit stayed. Every act of kindness, every word he would one day speak to heal others, began here, born from loss and love in equal measure. Soft orchestral swell, fading into distant wind. After Nancy's passing, the Lincoln cabin fell silent. Thomas worked from dawn until dark, trying to bury grief beneath the sound of hammer and saw. The children, Abraham and Sarah, grew thinner, quieter, their laughter replaced by the crack of the fire and the call of distant crows. Months turned into a long, gray year before Thomas made a journey back to Kentucky. When he returned, he brought with him a woman who carried warmth like sunlight in her voice, Sarah Bush Johnston, his new wife. She arrived with her own children, a wagon full of furniture, and a steady sense of kindness that changed everything. In that small cabin, she scrubbed the walls, mended blankets, and placed books on a shelf. For the first time since Nancy's death, the home felt alive again. She treated Abraham as her own, saw the spark in his eyes, the hunger for learning that never dimmed. Under her care, the boy's world brightened. The house was cleaner, meals warmer, and evenings filled with laughter instead of silence. Years later, Lincoln would say of her, "She was the best friend I ever had." Through Sarah's patience, a broken family found its balance again. The boy who had known sorrow now learned hope, a lesson he would carry into every chapter of his life. Soft orchestral rise, fading into the sound of birds returning in spring. The years rolled on, and the Indiana woods became Abraham's classroom. By day he split rails, plowed fields, and guided the slow oxen through sticky earth. Each stroke of the axe shaped his strength, but every quiet hour shaped his mind. Books were rare, yet he chased them like treasure. A borrowed copy of Aesop's Fables, a worn Bible, a few pages of Robinson Crusoe. He read them all by firelight, whispering each word until it felt his own. His stepmother, Sarah, watched proudly as he studied late into the night, the glow of the hearth turning his face bright against the shadows. Neighbors called him thoughtful, a boy who spoke little, worked hard, and helped anyone who asked. He learned figures by marking sums on a wooden shovel, shaving the surface clean to begin again. Each simple lesson became a step towards something greater. The frontier hardened his hands, but not his spirit. While storms battered the roof and winters tested every ounce of will, Abraham looked past the trees toward horizons he could only imagine. He was still a farm boy, still poor, but inside him stirred a quiet belief that knowledge and fairness could lift a man higher than circumstance. Low strings swell, the sound of wind over open fields. From sweat and solitude, the young Lincoln began to form the character that would define him. Humble, curious, unbreakable. Music fades into distant thunder and the call of an evening whip poor will. As Abraham reached his late teens, the frontier could no longer hold his restless energy. He stood tall now, lean, broad-shouldered, his face calm and steady. Work filled his days, but his thoughts reached beyond the cabin walls. Neighbors hired him to clear land, haul goods, and guide wagons. Every dollar earned was a step toward independence. When a chance came to join a flatboat crew bound for the Mississippi, he seized it without hesitation. The river stretched before him like a living road, winding through forests, towns, and miles of unknown country. He worked the long or under the sun, his hands blistered, his eyes drawn to the endless horizon. Along the banks he saw people, trade, and hardship, signs of a world far more complex than the one he had known. At night, he'd sit on deck, watching lanterns drift across the dark water. Something in him began to change, a quiet sense that his life would move beyond labor, toward purpose. When the flatboat returned to Indiana months later, he carried with him not just money, but vision. Music swells softly, distant brass and low strings. The journey had shown him the size of the nation, its beauty and its pain. From that voyage forward, Abraham Lincoln no longer belonged to the frontier alone. He belonged to America's unfolding story. Fade out, river water, faint echo of paddle wheel, soft orchestral resolution. When Abraham Lincoln stepped off the flatboat and settled in New Salem, Illinois, he carried little more than a change of clothes and a head full of determination. The frontier town sat on a hill above the Sangamon River, a handful of wooden buildings, a few stores, and the promise of opportunity. He found work wherever he could, splitting rails, running errands, and finally clerking at a small general store. His honesty and patience drew people to him. Neighbors soon learned that this tall, quiet newcomer could be trusted with any task and any secret. It was here that he earned the name they would remember him by, Honest Abe. At night, after the day's trade was done, he read by candlelight, law books, history, Shakespeare, anything he could borrow. His friends teased him for studying so much, but he only smiled and turned another page. In those years, New Salem became more than a place of work. It was a forge. Each friendship, each challenge, each small act of kindness tempered him for the life ahead. Music, soft strings with a hint of hope rising beneath the words. Lincoln began to see that strength was not found in power, but in service, in listening, helping, and leading with humility. The same boy who once swung an axe in the Indiana woods now began shaping himself into a man of purpose. A leader still unaware of how far his path would carry him. Fade out, quiet laughter in the distance, soft rustle of prairie wind. In 1832, the quiet peace of the Illinois frontier was broken. Tensions along the river grew, and the young state called for volunteers. Abraham Lincoln, now 23, joined without hesitation. He had no uniform, no training, only a sense of duty and the trust of his neighbors. The men of New Salem chose him as their captain. It was the first time he ever commanded anyone, and though he would later say he saw no real battle, the responsibility weighed on him deeply. In the wilderness, he learned that leadership was not in order shouted, but in fairness given. He shared food, built fires, and stood guard through the night beside his men. When the campaign ended, Lincoln returned to New Salem with little more than worn boots and new understanding. He had seen fear, hunger, and the cost of conflict, lessons that would shape his view of power for the rest of his life. Music, slow strings, reflective brass rising softly. Back home, his store failed, debts mounted, and the road ahead looked uncertain. Yet something inside him had changed. Where others saw defeat, he saw education, proof that even failure could teach courage. The boy who once read by firelight had now faced the world's storm and remained steady. In the quiet after hardship, Abraham Lincoln began to dream of service again. This time, not as a soldier, but as a representative of his people. Fade out. Soft drumbeat fades into whine through the tall grass. By 1834, Abraham Lincoln had become a man of quiet conviction, shaped by hardship, driven by the hunger to learn. The people of Sangamon County saw something steady in him. When he ran for the state legislature, they trusted the tall store clerk with kind eyes and plain words. His campaign was simple. He spoke of roads, schools, and fairness, of giving ordinary people a chance to rise. There were no slogans, no grand speeches, only sincerity. And sincerity was enough. When the votes were counted, Abraham Lincoln, age 25, had won his first election. In the old wooden chamber of the Illinois Assembly, he sat among lawyers, merchants, and landowners, men far more educated than himself. Yet Lincoln listened, studied, and found his place. He spoke rarely, but when he did, every word carried weight. His honesty became his armor, his humor a bridge between rivals. Music, soft strings build beneath, tone of emerging strength. Each night, he returned to his small room with law books spread across the table. He studied until dawn, shaping his mind as carefully as a craftsman shapes wood. The law became his new frontier, vast, demanding, full of moral terrain to cross. Through patience and principle, Lincoln began to earn not just votes, but respect. The self-taught boy from a cabin was now a voice in the assembly, a reminder that integrity, once tested, can rise from the humblest soil. Fade out, candle extinguishes, morning light creeps through window slats. In the years after his election, Abraham Lincoln turned his restless mind toward the law. By 1836, he had passed the bar, not through formal schooling, but by relentless study under the dim glow of lamplight. Each word of each statute he read and reread until it lived in memory. In Springfield, Illinois, he found his footing as a lawyer. The town was growing, dusty streets, wagons rolling past new brick buildings, the hum of a young America still finding its voice. Lincoln walked those streets daily, his worn briefcase swinging at his side. Clients came to him for fairness, not finesse. He listened more than he spoke, argued only when reason demanded, and never mocked the weak. In every courtroom, he carried the same quiet grace he had shown in every field and forest before. Music, soft piano and distant strings, introspective and steady. His words were simple, his heart even simpler, justice, truth, and kindness. For Lincoln, the law was not a weapon, but a compass, guiding him through the gray places of human struggle. At night, he still returned to solitude, books, letters, silence. He began to wonder not only about law and order, but about purpose. What made a life worthy? What shaped a nation's soul? In those reflections, his calling grew clearer. The courtroom was only a beginning. His lessons in fairness, in patience, in mercy, they were preparing him for something far greater than any case could hold. Fade out. Candle flame flickers, replaced by morning sunlight over Springfield rooftops. By 1839, Abraham Lincoln's life had grown busier, yet lonelier. Courtrooms and committees filled his days, but his nights still belonged to silence and thought. That was when he met Mary Todd, a spirited young woman from Kentucky, sharp in wit and clear in ambition. She saw in Lincoln what few others did, a depth that reached beyond his plain clothes and quiet manners. And he, in her laughter and intellect, found both challenge and comfort. Their conversations stretched late into the evenings of politics, ideals, and the great future of their country. But Lincoln was a man of doubt as much as reason. His heart wrestled with fear, fear of not being enough, fear of failing the woman who believed in him. Their courtship was not a straight path, but a winding one, filled with affection, hesitation, and the weight of expectations. Music, soft strings rising, tone of emotional reflection. Still, through every moment, Mary stood firm, understanding that greatness often hides behind uncertainty. When they finally married in 1842, it was not a union of ease, but of endurance, two different worlds bound by faith in one another's purpose. In her presence, Lincoln began to see that love, like leadership, demanded honesty and humility. And though the road ahead would test them both, the foundation was set in the home they built together, in the quiet evenings filled with hope and letters yet to be written. Fade out. Faint sound of wind through an open window. Candlelight flickering over a wedding band.